Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Standards Advisor Training for Small and Unhoused Chapters. My name is Carmen Mincy, and I will be your technical producer and moderator this evening. This webinar will be presented by Katie Meehan and Mary Beth Annis. Before we start the presentation, let's take a moment to ensure that everyone is ready and familiar with the webinar control panel. On the right side of your screen, you will see the attendee control panel, and on the left is the webinar viewer window. This viewer window will display the presenter screen when the webinar begins, which I hope you can see now. The control panel can be minimized or expanded by clicking on the horizontal double arrow button in the upper left corner. Minimizing the panel allows a better view of the presentation. Take a moment to practice. There are a few features of the control panel that the attendees should know. First, be familiar with the Raise Your Hand button. This button is located along the left side of the control panel. It allows you to virtually raise your hand if you have a question or if you want to respond to a question being asked by the presenter. Click this button to raise your hand now. Okay, it looks like some of you found that. Clicking the button again will lower your hand. Another important feature of the control panel is the questions pane. To submit a question, type it into the question box. These may be questions related to the presentation or technical questions related to the GoToWebinar system. You may also be asked by the presenter to type your ideas or responses here as part of an exercise during the webinar. Please send a quick note in your questions pane now so I know you found it. I haven't seen any questions come through, but as you have questions throughout the webinar, I will be monitoring those, and there will be stops periodically for questions, so we'll get those answered for you. Questions may be submitted at any time, and as I said, I'll be monitoring them, and we'll respond as it makes sense to. During the webinar, you may be asked to respond to a polling question or a survey. Please take the time to participate as your input and ideas are valuable to the group. Be sure to stay attentive and to interact as much as possible during this webinar. The quality of your experience depends on your attention and participation. Try to avoid the distractions of responding to email, checking Facebook, instant messaging, or working on other tasks at your computer. If you need to step away for a moment, do not close the GoToWebinar window, as you will be required to log in again if you wish to rejoin the session. If you experience problems with the audio, one possible solution is to use the conference call number and listen to the presentation using your phone. Click the Use Telephone option in the audio pane of your control panel to view the conference call number. This webinar is being recorded, and the online archive will be available to view on the CAPA website in approximately 2 weeks. Are there any questions at this point? If there are, please type them into your chat window. I don't see any questions at the moment. So now I would now like to hand the virtual microphone over to Katie. Over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Carmen. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the first of 4 Standards Advisor trainings. We broke these up into different sessions based on chapter size and whether or not they were housed or unhoused, because half of this webinar is going to be content that we're presenting out, and then half of it we wanted to leave open for question and answers. So we were hoping that the questions that would ask would pertain to everyone on the call. This training is in addition to the VPS officer training webinar that's going to be held on February 8th. So some stuff that we present out today is going to be a little bit high level just because we are going into detail on that webinar. So we hope you all will be joining us for that as well. Like I said, my name's Katie. I am one of the assistants to the Director of Standards under Colette Rangich, who is our Director of Standards. With me tonight as well is a few of our standard specialists. We have Mary Beth Annis, who works with ADA Chapter, Kathleen Burrell, who works with Z province, and Carmen Mincy, who works with Alpha and Rho provinces. I, as assistant to the Director of Standards, work with regions 1, 2, 3, Z, East, and Delta provinces, but then specifically as a standards specialist, I work directly with Beta province. And as you can see on the screen, we do have Colette Rangich, who's the Director of Standards, email address, as well as my assistant email address. The standards specialist accounts, if you don't know them yet, they're just standards dot whatever the specialist area is, alpha, eta, z, beta, at kkg.org. So they're pretty quick and simple for everyone. And then going on to the agenda, we did send out a survey last spring to all of our standards advisors asking what they thought was going well, what areas they needed additional training in. So we took a look at those survey results and really used that to build this training for you guys. We are going to go over the team structure, committee organization advisor responsibilities, just some communication report stuff, what requires prior approval, and then liaisons and hot topics. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mary Beth to talk about the standards team structure.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Hi, everybody. First of all, we want to highlight the new structure for standards in case anyone isn't aware, because the standards team is piloting the new structure for volunteers that is going to be voted on at convention this summer. In the past, it was just the director of standards and her 2 assistants that were working with all of our chapters across the country, and now it has been expanded to those 3 women plus 12 additional standards specialists that work with anywhere between 6 to 17 chapters. As you can imagine, this has greatly increased the response time and accessibility and support for all of our chapters with their standards-related needs, which is what so many chapters and advisors have really been asking for. Because of the success that we've already had in just 1 semester with this new structure, we will be continuing this structure for standards regardless of the vote at convention. So as a standard specialist, our expectation is that we're in contact with each of our chapters that we've worked with on a weekly basis. We are doing our best to include all of you as the advisors in any correspondence that we have with the chapter. However, it is important to remember that the chapter's officers are to self-govern, so that might not be possible in every single situation. On a similar note, I want to take this moment to remind each of you also to make sure that all of your information is up-to-date in Q reports, and that your email address that is one that you check on a very regular basis is updated on the CAPA website so that you are receiving all the relevant information from headquarters in a very timely fashion. Like I said, in only 1 semester with this new structure, we've seen a huge increase in communication, and we've been able to build relationships with the VPSs and all of you as the advisors. There's been much faster response times to chapters and better support for everyone. So that is a great success that we've already had. But please do remember also that all of the volunteers are human. So we want to make sure that if you're concerned at all that you're getting a different answer to your question from a specialist or a PDC or an assistant to the Director of Standards, please let us know. We all are more than welcome to, or more than happy to jump on a phone conference in order to clear up any confusion that there might be and get everybody on the exact same page. Every day really is a great opportunity for all of us to learn something new about this organization. So if we really do need to make a phone conference happen, that's an easy thing for us to do. So we're going to take a moment to pause real quick and see if we have any questions about the new structure or working with the specialists or anything of that nature before we move on. So is there anything, Carmen?
I don't see any questions right now. So why don't we go ahead?
Okay, perfect. So for the next slide, if you'll go to the next one, Carmen. Perfect. Just a quick overview for any new advisors. The Standards Committee is to only consist of you as the advisor, the VPS, your chapter president, new member chairman, a member at large, and a member from each academic class. So that's 1 freshman, 1 sophomore, 1 junior, and 1 senior. any deviation from this structure requires approval from the PDC and RDC. Also, it's important to note that the new member chairman does sit on the committee for the entire term. That means she's going to be at every meeting during her year as the new member chairman, regardless of if the chapter has new members that semester or not. If any member of the standards committee cannot serve during a specific investigation for whatever reason, you are allowed to pull committee members from the VP Academic Excellence Committee temporarily. They have also been elected to that role, and that role requires confidentiality as with standards. Therefore, they are still expected to maintain that confidentiality if you need to pull them into standards for a specific situation. Another thing that we want to mention is that a chapter member does not get to choose who they want in their conference, and there's absolutely not to be any one-on-one meetings ever. I know sometimes a member will ask for that, but we do not want to ever see that the VPS is meeting alone with a chapter member. It needs to be within the standards committee group. If the group does deem it appropriate to have a smaller group for whatever situation, that group is to be comprised of the president, VPS, and advisor only. But again, this shouldn't happen very often. You have the whole committee for a reason, and really in most instances, the whole committee should be present for any meeting. Go ahead, next slide, please. So the committee responsibilities are first to meet every week, regardless of if they have a member being called in for a conference or not. You still should be meeting every week. And they also are responsible for holding the member conferences, which an advisor must be present for. They are expected to communicate regularly with you as the advisor and their specialist on a weekly basis, as well as pulling in their PDC, the assistant to the director of standards, and the director of standards if necessary for any larger situations. But we again want to stress using y'all as the advisor and the standards specialist as their first line of communication. They also must submit minutes and weekly reports to the standards reports at kkg.org email address within 48 hours. This timeline is new, so you might want to reiterate that to your VPSs, but it is imperative that they are submitting their minutes and forms within that time frame, because oftentimes chapters will submit minutes too late for us to be able to assist them with certain situations. They also should be communicating regularly with their liaison officers, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on a different slide. As well as really the standards committee is the pillars of the chapter and should be upholding fraternity standards and educating the chapter on those standards. Next slide.
Mary Beth, we actually had a question, which I think is appropriate to answer here, about advisors attending if they can't attend in person. What are the
You'll wait 1 second. That actually is going to be, I believe, on our next slide. We'll talk about that more.
Okay.
Okay, it might not be on this slide, but it is on one slide in a minute, so we'll get to that. So continued responsibilities, as here you can see several of the other responsibilities as the standards committee. A couple that we really want to touch on is the confidentiality. That is very key. It's imperative that our chapters can trust that their meetings are being kept confidential, to have that trust and respect within the chapter. Another really important thing is spirit and morale, and this is a huge thing that we're really trying to stress with a lot of our chapters, because we don't want standards committee to be seen as policing the chapters like they often are, and having them be responsible for spirit and morale is a really good way to keep that balance. The other thing that I wanted to point out is the loss of membership paperwork, whether it's voluntary or requested resignations. All of that paperwork is the responsibility of the VPS. And the other things that are listed on here will be discussed in detail more so during the VPS webinar on February 8th. So if you want more information on those things, you can get that then. Next slide, please. Here's where we talked about that. So it is really important for advisors to be present for any conference that may result in disciplinary action, even a warning. So I know that we do have advisors that might not be in the same town as their chapters, and they are advising from afar. So you are more than welcome to virtually be present in the conference. So that's Skype or conference call or FaceTime or whatever method is easiest for all of y'all involved. But there's a lot of reasons why we want the advisors to be present. One is that a member being called in might find comfort in there being someone else than just the peers that she's currently in school in. And the advisor is also there to give input and insight when the committee is determining action to take. But I also want to remind you that it's important to be able to empower the women to make decisions on their own and not use their advisors as a crutch, as they often like to do, because they know that y'all been there before and you have some experience, but it's important for them to come up with their own decisions and their actions to take, because they really can do it. They just need a little bit of y'all's advice along the way. It is also another thing that I wanted to note is that we are requiring the documents to have physical signatures for everyone involved. So that's the advisor, the VPS, and the woman that's being called into the meeting. We do want those physical signatures. I know that's a change from the past, but it lets us have a more inclusive record than having to go back and look through things with a chapter. And there are some great apps that you can download from onto your smartphone or tablet for this. Genius Scan and Genius Sign I've been kind of playing around with lately, and they're great examples. They let you take a photo of the form, and then it can be emailed to you as the advisor if you're not present for the meeting. You can also then use the touchscreen on any of your devices to sign it and email it right back to the VPS. So it's a great way to get those documents signed, since we are requiring it to have the physical signature as well. I'm sure there's other apps that you can use, so definitely kind of search around and see which one works best for you and your VPS, but those are a couple that we've had success with that you can kind of start from there. You also should be included on any and all emails that are sent from the VPS, so really stressing that to your VPS that you need to be included on anything that she is sending out, even if she just CCs you on whatever emails that are going out to the chapter or to specific members. You should be on those emails. I think I answered the question that they had before about the advisors that aren't in the town, but do we have any other questions other than that, Carmen?
I don't see any other questions at this point.
Okay. Shall we continue? Okay, so communication and reports. For any communication being sent, we really want to stress to the chapter women to use the following subject line format, and their chapter name, the meeting date, and then the subject of the email. As you know, we have many chapters that we work with, and using this format will help us keep all of our chapters separate and be able to respond quicker, knowing which chapter we're getting the email from. The VPS should also always send in the signed probation forms, warning of probation forms, and minutes in the same email that's going to that standards reports email to headquarters. This will prevent the VPS from having to do more work in the future to go back and kind of find where those forms went and where the meeting minutes went. So they all really should be going in the same email to headquarters. If you have any questions that need to be answered quickly, the first place to look is the fraternity bylaws, standing rules, and policies, as well as your chapter documents. Pretty much all of your answers should be able to be answered within those documents, but if you can't find a specific answer for your situation, that's when you kind of start going through your standards chain of command. They'll start with you as the advisor, and then y'all can come to the standards specialist, and then if we need to pull in the PDC and RDC and all the rest of the chain of command, we definitely can do that. Next, Carmen. So who gets what when? Minutes should be sent by the VPS weekly within that 48-hour window that we talked about to the standards reports at kkg.org email, and she should be CCing her advisor, the PDC, and the RDC. I know we've had multiple advisors ask us for a cheat sheet of who gets what forms and when, and I know we kind of go through reports and you don't read them through all the way completely, but all the reports actually do list exactly who the recipient should be for that individual form. So that's just a great FYI for you to know that all those forms do have that information that are printed on them for y'all's ease of access and knowledge. So also for any probation forms or warning of probation, again, those should be sent in the same email altogether as the minutes, but those also need to be sent in immediately after imposing a probation. You can't really have any delay of putting a woman on probation and those probation forms getting sent in. So that's really important that we get that sent really quickly. Also, since the specialist isn't included on those emails, if you'll notice, those emails really only need to be the forms, and any questions or concerns that you have should be sent in a separate email to your specialist to ask. And then, so the loss of membership forms are going to the advisor, the PDC, the RDC at that standards reports email as well. Next. So what requires approval from the Director of Standards? If a probation or extension of a probation exceeds that allowable 10-week period for active members or 6-week period for new members, the VPS needs to reach out to the Director of Standards before putting that probation into effect, so before she is calling a member into standards. If the VPS thinks that the decision might go that direction from the committee, she can actually get the approval from the Director of Standards prior to meeting with the committee and the members, so that you have that option available to you ahead of time. So if you kind of think that that might be the direction you go with a specific member conference, then go ahead and just shoot Colette an email and explain to her the situation, and she can approve that for you before the meeting happens. A requested resignation or a dismissal or a broken pledge to membership also needs to have the approval before you mention this to the member as a course of action. So that is going to be something that needs to be emailed in to the Director of Standards or the assistants before that member gets called into standards. Social probation is also another thing that has to be approved before you can use any terms. So before you have the ability to sign a probation term restricting a member from attending social events for any situation, you have to go through and get that approved by them. And that approval is now only good for one academic year, and the chapter must reapply for that each year. So after they receive the approval from the Director of Standards, they then have to educate the chapter and hold a chapter vote in order for that to completely go into effect and for the committee to be able to use that. And it's only allowed for appropriate for approved behavior. So if they're approved for attendance only, they cannot also assign a member who is sent home for a social. So you kind of have to use it for what it was originally intended for. Okay, so the next one. Liaisons. Okay, so I said that we would mention this later, and so liaisons should be reporting weekly or bi-weekly to their assigned officer and bring information to the committee meeting. So members of the Standards Committee are going to be liaisons to any of the committees that are listed at the bottom of your slides, and they are going to then bring that information to the Standards Committee that they have. And it's used really to take some of the responsibilities away from the VPS. They already have a lot going on that we all know, so this is a great way for them to be able to delegate out those responsibilities. So basically, for example, if the treasurer has a list of women who haven't paid dues, instead of contacting the VPS and sending her a whole list of it. They'll contact whoever on the standards committee is the finance liaison and give her that information to take to the standards committee. So again, it's just a great way for the VPS to be able to delegate to her committee members and really get them involved even more so. Next slide, please. So many people have asked in the survey that was sent out for more resources, and a lot of the resources that you're really asking for are things that probably already exist. And I know that you can go to the Capitol website and they're all on there. And if those paper resources aren't enough and they aren't explaining or giving you a proper avenue for whatever your specific situation is, then you can start going to, again, your chain of command for the standards committee. So starting with your standards specialist, and then we'll pull in the VP, the PDC and the RDC if we need to. But all those resources are posted on the website. The first part you want to start with are the fraternity bylaws. They are pretty much the highest level of resources that we have and can be used in all situations when meeting with others. So those are a really great resource for you to use when you need to. There's the membership commitment statement, which a member signs yearly, and they agree to all of the documents and the expectations, and you can review that with members during the conferences if you have them. I don't believe that advisors have access to that statement, but the VPS most definitely can pull that statement from the website and have a printed copy for any member conferences that you have. There's also a resource online that's called Suggested Guidelines for Specific Situations, and this is a huge resource for committees. It gives advice on how to handle member conferences with different situations and gives ideas of appropriate probation terms to assign. And it also has a section that includes ideas for spirit and morale, so that's a great thing to look to. There's also what's called a Working Together webinar series. So it's a webinar series that headquarters created about how the VPS and her committee can work with several of the other different situations. So it kind of, for instance, it has one for the VPAE. So it explains what the VPAE is responsible and what the VPS is responsible for and kind of how those two can work together cohesively. So that's a great series that if you're having any issues within the chapter, that you can look to those webinars of how to work together. It also gives examples for standard committee tutorials, like a mock standards meeting. It's a great way to review things with new committees, especially since all of y'all should be starting with new committees right now, and kind of gives them an idea of what to expect with a standards conference, and you can use those for the chapters so they know what to expect with the conference coming in. Next one. So here are some resources that we have been working on that are a large concern for many of our chapters. I know women's health and mental health has been a large concern, and there actually will be a workshop at the convention this summer that is going to be put on by mental health experts. So that is a great resource for any of the VPSs or their advisors to go to as well if they're going to be in attendance for convention. We also worked on a gender-based violence prevention presentation, and that presentation should have been completed by the education chairman, and then the resource guide would be available for the VPS. This program was mandatory, so please confirm also with your chapters that they have completed that program. But the resource guide that comes with it will be extremely helpful for many situations that you might have on this type of situation. We also have a new staff member that's working on compiling past investigation techniques used by Fraternity Council and by our chapters into one investigative process. So once that is completed, you will also have that resource to use within your chapters to help you for any kind of situation. There also is a Using Standards to Deal with Your Problems webinar that may help with communication and how to approach situations as well. I believe now we're going to go to the next slide, and I am handing the mic back over to Jenna for some of our most common issues.
You're actually handing it to Katie, but that's okay because Jenna and I are pretty much the same person.
Sorry, Katie.
Thanks, Mary Beth. So one of the jobs and responsibilities as the standards specialist is that we track the types of issues that our chapters are placing women on probation for, as well as the number of warning probations that we receive per chapter. And the reason why we started tracking this information is because we found it's very helpful to help the chapters that we're supporting be able to recognize trends and see, okay, we're really dealing with attendance a lot more this semester than we have in the past. It also helps our province directors and our regional directors to get a better idea of the issues that their chapter is facing and the issues that their members are being held accountable for. So during the fall 2015 semester, we received over 2,400 probation issues that were addressed by probation, I should say. So, for instance, if a probation form was received that was addressing lack of adherence to the attendance policy and also financial delinquency, that they hadn't paid their dues yet, we counted that as both attendance and finance. So it was addressing two issues with one probation, and then we received just over 600 warnings of probation forms, which seems like a lot, but it's actually great because we're holding our members accountable. The types of issues that we're tracking as far as probation is concerned include academics, alcohol, attendance, chapter rules, conduct, drugs, event issues, finance, hazing, housing, and social media. So like I said, it just helps us to be able to track what the trends are that a chapter might be facing. The largest issues that we saw overall amongst all of the chapters were attendance, conduct, and alcohol. But we do know that this might change for your chapters, and some advisors were asking for some sort of roadmap on how to handle common situations. Unfortunately, we can't provide you with a roadmap because that takes away that self-governing piece that we think is really important for our chapters to have as they function and be able to make some decisions for themselves. But a great way to kind of create your own roadmap is if you just role play with your committee 3 to 5 of the top issues that your chapter is facing on a regular basis. You can hold those mock standard meetings. If you're not sure of which ones might be the top ones that you guys have been dealing with over the past semester or past year, please reach out to your specialist. We have that information. We can go back in our files and pull that and let you know what the big ticket items were that your chapters were facing. And then that helps if you start with that early on in the semester, have your committee walk through a scenario, maybe that a member has missed 4 of the last 5 chapter meetings and she's not sending excuses, have them talk through what they would consider when they're making a decision and what type of action they might be willing to take, and that kind of gives them an idea of what they want to do and a way to hold their members kind of consistently accountable throughout the whole semester so that they can kind of keep holding and addressing the same behavior with the same sort of action. Carmen, you want to move to the next slide? Thank you. So this is the last slide that we have before we get to any questions that you guys have. We just wanted to hit some hot topics that we've been seeing as a standards team over the last year. First one being the timeliness when addressing issues. So like Mary Beth said, the committees need to be meeting weekly and issues need to be addressed at the next meeting following when it happened. Far too often we're seeing it's 3-4 weeks after a formal event and the standards committee is finally calling members in from who were drinking underage at that formal. At that point it's been so long we're not really addressing behavior quickly and enough to be able to kind of get a handle on it. Also, a lot of our members don't like to show up for their standards conferences, and committees are using that as a reason to not take action. They're trying to hold off on it. Your committee has every right to take action if that member does not show up for her standards conference, and they really should be taking action. Our members should not be dictating when our committee decides to move forward with something. If the member does not show up and your committee decides to assign a warning or assign probation, all they have to do is email that probation form to the member. The VPS does not have to hunt the member down for a signature, so they can still use that as a chance to talk, make a decision based off of the information that the standards committee already has, and make a decision to move forward so that they're addressing everything pretty quickly. Also, probation has to start the day of the meeting that the standards committee is meeting. It can't be postponed for a week or a month or until they feel like it's going to be an appropriate time for the member. We need it to start right away. If the probation falls over a holiday break, a winter break, summer break, it would just stop at the last day of classes or the last day of finals and then pick up again when everyone returns to campus. That even counts if the member goes abroad. So if she's put on probation, say in May at the end of their spring semester, she goes abroad for the fall semester, but she still has 2 weeks left of her probation, that would roll over to the first 2 weeks of the spring semester once she returns back to campus. So there should never be a worry about a school vacation or a member going abroad as a reason why they should not be placing a member on probation. Standards and housing is another tough situation that we've been seeing a lot lately. So the Standards Committee does not have the authority to evict any members from a house. So we just kind of want to give that as an FYI. If there's any housing related issues, that's a House Board concern. But you guys, since this is for an unhoused webinar, probably don't really face that issues too much. So we'll just move right on to academic. And for here, we see a lot of members being placed on probation because they did not make a grade. And you can't see me, but I'm doing grades in air quotes. Chapters sometimes feel like we have a grade requirement for our membership, and we do not. So there should be no automatic probation just because a member did not reach a certain GPA requirement or because a member was on a period of concern for too many semesters in a row. There are some women who are just C students. You know, they try really hard, they go to class, they do everything they're supposed to, and they just don't get good grades. We're not going to punish our membership for that. If they are meeting the terms of a period of concern agreement, then there's no reason why the Standards Committee needs to be meeting with them. If you have any more questions about that, please reach out to your standards specialist, your province director of chapters, or watch that Working Together webinar series. We're really trying to make sure that the issues that standards do not need to be involved in as far as academics are concerned stay with the Academic Excellence Committee because they're just better equipped to be able to assist with those situations. Loss of membership is another thing that we get a ton of questions on. So how do they process it? What are the steps? If a member says she wants to resign and she is not in good standing because she's either on probation or she owes money to the chapter, that cannot be processed as a voluntary resignation. It has to be processed as a requested resignation, which means they would need approval from Colette as the Director of Standards. So it's just something to keep in the back of your head. Another thing that we're seeing a lot is that the chapters are getting a lot of women marked as RNP, which is resignation not processed, on their key reports roster. This happens when the registrar might mark a member as RNP and then the paperwork never gets sent to headquarters for that loss of membership. It could be 6 weeks from when they submit the paperwork to headquarters to when council will actually vote to accept the resignation and remove the member from the roster. If you're seeing anyone on that roster or your VPS is seeing anyone on that roster for longer than a 6-week period, please reach out to headquarters using the KKG hq@kkg.org email address to see if they didn't receive the paperwork or if there's just a backup with the council meetings so we can kind of get those RMPs addressed as quickly as possible. We've seen a lot of chapters with 20, 30 women marked as RMP on that roster, and that's really affecting the fees that the chapter is paying, what their roster looks like, what their recruitment numbers can look like, so we want to get that taken care of for the chapters as quickly as possible. Talking to parents. So it always seems like there's at least one member in every chapter who she gets in trouble and she goes to her parents, and her parents start contacting the VPS, they contact you as the advisor, they'll contact headquarters to complain about the probation or the action that the committee is taking. And we've seen a lot of times where even though the person speaking to the parent means well, they start oversharing. They're talking a lot about our private practices, our private policies, or private procedures. They're breaking confidentiality. The parents about the member, and we have to remember that our commitment is to the member. We owe explanations to the members, but we don't owe explanations to the members' parents. So if you do have parents reaching out to you about a situation, please don't hesitate to pass their contact information on to your standards specialist, your assistant, your director of standards, to your province director. We'd be more than happy to speak with them on your behalf if you're not comfortable. A lot of times they just want to talk and vent, and we can explain to them that their daughter will get all of the answers to her questions in a standards conference, but we do explain to them that our chapters are self-governing, that we, for the most part, aren't going to come in and change any decision that the chapter has made. So we just kind of give them a high-level overview. We don't go into details about the behavior, and we just kind of answer their questions, but more let them know that we'll answer specific questions with the actual member so that we're not breaking that confidentiality. The last topic we wanted to talk about is changing the perception of standards. This is something that a lot of people mentioned on the survey that they were looking to do. We know that sometimes our standards committees can be seen as the police. They can be seen as mean if they're trying to hold their members accountable and the members don't really agree with it. And we know it's a tough spot for our standards committee to be in. So we wanted to offer some suggestions on ways that you can change that perception. The first is to review that member commitment statement with the chapter at a chapter meeting. So remind them, even though they sign that all in the fall or when they first joined and they sign it every year, remind them what exactly it is that they're signing so they know what the rules are. It kind of helps them that they know you're holding them accountable to this document that they sign and they pledge to uphold. Also, holding those mock standards meetings so that the chapters can see the purpose of the committee. If they see what a committee meeting is going to look like, so if they get called in, they know what to expect. They also can see what the committee considers while they're thinking through a situation, deciding what action to take, can kind of help them to think a little bit differently about how the standards committee acts. And then finally, role play with common issues in small groups. So if you break your entire chapter up and give them scenarios that are common that your committee sees, like maybe a member was caught drinking underage at a social event, was sent home, and then give them that suggested guidelines for specific situations document and ask them to come up with a action that they would give to the member. That would give you guys some great ideas as advisors and your committee of actions and terms that they could come up with, but it also helps them to realize that they might be a little bit more harsh on this member than your standards committee is being. So just another way to kind of put them in control, give them a little bit more information about standards, and hopefully get them to see that standards is not all about being bad, and that what you guys are really trying to do to make the chapters a better place. So now we are going to open the floor for questions that you guys might have, either about stuff we talked about in the webinar or stuff that you just have questions on from your experiences. We are going to ask if you have a very member-specific question or something that you think might only pertain to you, you send us an email. My email address with Jenna's is listed on the screen, just because we don't want to break that confidentiality on this webinar. But if you have any questions, please send them either in the chat pane or the questions pane, and we will read the questions and answer them for you.
Okay.
I'm not seeing any questions pop up at the moment, Katie.
Okay. So if you don't have any questions, which is fine, but if something comes up later, okay, wait, oh, I see we have some question. We have one question coming through. So I have found that our VPS was turning into the chapter counselor. Chapter members felt like the VPS was the person to go to for everything. So Colleen, do you mean that members were going to your VPS to vent, or ask questions? and also deal with issues that should have been brought up to other officers. Yeah, so sometimes that is, and that's kind of why we push that the liaison roles, is so that the VPS isn't always the go-to person. So it's kind of an important balance to have, that if they're coming up to the VPS, I think your VPS needs to be able to direct them to a standards conference. Every standards meeting should be having open door time, so ask them to come in if they wanted to talk to the full standards committee. Come into the open door time and discuss the issue with everyone so the full standards committee can help them. It also might just be there to support them if they are eventing and they're having a tough time. And then you can either, in that session and in that atmosphere, tell them, okay, if this is something that really has to do with a finance officer, we think you should take your concerns to them directly, or we can help set up a mediation for them if it's they're butting heads or they're not getting along, or it's an issue that we really do need to keep an eye on. But really, we want to kind of direct them to the whole standards committee and emphasize that open door time at your standards or your chapter meetings, so that members know they should be coming to this first 5 to 10 to 15 minutes at the beginning of every standards meeting, that's their time to come and bring up their concerns, bring up any issues that they're having to the standards committee, that coming one-on-one to the VPS is not really the outlet for that. So I hope, Colleen, that answers your question. So let's see, Lauren is asking, we have a member who has been on period of concern for many semesters and was sent to us because she didn't want to work with the VPAE anymore, wasn't following our POC, period of concern, terms. Do we continue to work with her every semester and give her probation terms? She has said she has mental health problems that affect studying, but her grades are so low she risks not graduating, and there have been no changes in her habits across the last few years. So really, Lauren, I'm going to kind of answer this high level, but I do want you to send me an email as well, and we can kind of deal with it a little bit more directly. But if a member is coming to the VPA or from the VPAE committee and the Academic Excellence Committee to standards, really she should be placed on a probation. If she meets all the terms of that probation by the end of the time it ends, if you do a 4-week or say a 6-week probation, if by the end of that 6 weeks she's met all the terms of her probation, she should be going back to the Academic Excellence Committee to continue on a period of concern or whatever level of support that they have set up for her. Really, the act of sending them to standards to be placed on probation is just to help get them back on track if they're not meeting their terms. So this they shouldn't be consistently on a probation and over and over and over again. If they're on a probation once and they don't meet their terms, their probation should be extended. If we extend their probation once, we can't extend it a second time. So if they break their terms a second time in the same probation length, then we need to be pursuing loss of membership for that member. But really, it needs to be a one-time thing, probation, and then they go back to the Academic Excellence Committee to continue if they feel like they need to be on a POC, a period of concern, for a significant amount of time. So, any other questions? Guys, Mary Beth, Kathleen, Carmen, do you guys want to answer any of those with experiences you guys had this semester?
No, I think you did a good job. I did the same thing.
Any other questions? If not, I don't want to keep you guys here just waiting to see if questions come in. So again, if something comes up, please don't hesitate to reach out to your standards specialist, to myself or Jenna, to Colette. We're more than willing to help you guys at any stage in the process, whether it's just answering questions, helping you guys prepare for our conference, or helping you after the fact if you kind of get into some sticky situations. So please reach out. We hope you guys found this helpful, and we hope that you will be joining us on February 8th. So thanks so much, guys.
Thanks.